on ABC News and ABC News Radio. This is Planet America's Fireside Chat. Hello, I'm John Barrett.
I'm Shazza Chidala.
This week, American Carnage 2.0. Republicans warn of a grim future for America under Joe Biden as Donald Trump accepts their nomination for 4 more years.
We're going to be getting reaction from Sam Nunberg, who worked on Trump's first campaign and ended up getting sued by him.
Who didn't? We'll also check the latest polls for any kind of a convention bounce either way and try and explain what's going on in Kenosha, Wisconsin. But first this week, the Republican convention mostly delivered to an empty auditorium in Washington, D.C., where the party put its most diverse foot forward while simultaneously stirring up a law and order campaign casting the Black Lives Matter movement as the enemy. Donald Trump today accepted his party's presidential nomination for a second term. After another tentative descent down a flight of stairs, he delivered a script without any great fluency or apparent familiarity. Instead of proudly accepting the nomination,
I profoundly accept this nomination for President of the United States.
Yeah, it's interesting. The president's speech was delivered in front of about 1,000 officials, family and guests, including nurses and first responders, on the south lawn of the White House. Reportedly, only those seated closest to Trump were required to take a COVID test beforehand. There were a handful of face masks in evidence. Federal property is exempt from DC's 50-person gathering limit at the moment. Now, last week, Joe Biden didn't mention President Trump once by name. Today, though, in Trump's speech, it was a little different.
Joe Biden is not a savior of America's soul. Biden is a Trojan horse for socialism.
And the location itself was controversial too. Typically, presidents do not campaign from the White House, and they do not use taxpayer-funded federal property as props. It is also unusual to speak from behind a podium bearing the presidential seal. But then again, it's also unusual to charge the Secret Service money to stay at your golf course so that they can protect you while you get a few in on the back nine. So in short, these are not typical times, Chaz. But as for the president's speech, there were a few people online saying, it's a terrible speech, he's delivering it awfully off the teleprompter and so on. What about the key messages though? Because they can sometimes get lost in those points delivered on style. Was there substance there?
Yeah, look, I think he did his job. He was supposed to make his case for what he's done for the last 4 years. He went through a lot of stuff, and Ivanka did as well. Both of them, I thought, did very well in coming up with a whole bunch of policies that he had rammed through over the last 4 years that, to be honest, some of them I completely forgot myself, and it's my job to be across that. So I thought, yeah, okay, he's done a pretty good job there. I also thought that he dealt with a couple of important issues, like, for instance, dealing with Joe Biden's main attack on him, which is character. Mm-hmm. The whole convention for Joe Biden was about character and about Donald Trump's character. And I did say this to you before on Wednesday as well. All convention, people were avoiding it. No one was trying to tell stories about Donald Trump's character until Ivanka came up and started talking about him as a grandfather and him behind the scenes. No one even tried to personalise or humanise Donald Trump at all, whereas the whole convention for Joe Biden was like that. But then Donald Trump came up with, I thought, a great line, in fact, the perfect line to deal with Joe Biden's attack on him.
He has spent his entire career on the wrong side of history. Biden voted for the NAFTA disaster, the single worst trade deal ever enacted. He supported China's entry into the World Trade Organization, one of the greatest economic disasters of all time. After those Biden calamities, the United States lost 1 in 4 manufacturing jobs. We laid off workers in Michigan, Ohio, New Hampshire, Pennsylvania, and many other states. They didn't want to hear Biden's hollow words of empathy. They wanted their jobs back. So
look at Joe Biden's record. The workers don't want hollow words of empathy. They want their jobs back. I thought that was a gut punch to Joe Biden's attack on him.
Yeah. Political jitsu is hugely important.
Yeah.
If you can turn somebody's perceived strength into a weakness, you're often onto a winner. It's worked very effectively against Democrats, including John Kerry in the past. He was a war hero. turned into a traitor by the Bush messaging machine in 2004. If Joe Biden's empathy can be turned into some kind of ineffectual, declining, weak old man who really isn't tough enough to get us out of the hole that we suddenly find ourselves in, that could be very effective. I don't know that there's much evidence that it's working yet, but it seems to be a pretty smart attack line.
Yeah. I'll also say that it's a 2-for-1, that attack, because it also turns the referendum on Trump and his character to become a choice between him and Joe Biden, which of course the incumbent always wants, a choice. He doesn't want it to be a referendum on him, especially when his approval rating is 42%. He wants it to be a choice, and so that was a very clever way of doing that. Another way he created that choice, I thought quite effectively, was taking another line of Joe Biden's, once again, bit of jiu-jitsu, as you say, the line of Joe Biden saying he's an ally of the light, once again implying that Donald Trump is the dark, and also COVID for that matter. I thought that Donald Trump turned that on its head quite cleverly.
At the Democrat convention, you barely heard a word about their agenda. But that's not because they don't have one. It's because their agenda is the most extreme set of proposals ever put forward by a major party nominee. Joe Biden may claim he is an ally of the light, but when it comes to his agenda, Biden wants to keep us completely in the dark.
And that there is the Republicans' #1 message of this whole convention. I think Lara Trump actually put it best.
This is not just a choice between Republican and Democrat or left and right. This is an election that will decide if we keep America America or if we head down an uncharted, frightening path towards socialism.
Once again, a choice between America. It's a pretty winning message to be representing America and socialism. Now, if they can pull that off to try and frame that choice, that's Donald Trump's best chance of winning the election, in my view.
Yeah. There's nothing original about any of these attacks. No. It is boilerplate Republican. They're a bunch of socialists. We're the ones that are going to be good for the economy and good on national security. We will keep you safe. It's the father party versus mother party narrative that has existed for more than 50 years.
They've existed because they work.
Well, they don't always work, because Barack Obama beat Mitt Romney and John McCain, who tried it. Bill Clinton beat Bob Dole and George H.W. Bush, who tried it. It works sometimes. So the question is, does this very familiar trope resonate in 2020 at a time when, at the same time as Donald Trump is trying to sort of point to all of these cases of civil unrest in the wake of police shootings and other unrest, they're trying to say that, well, this is a sign of what the future would be like under Joe Biden. But of course, this is literally the present under Donald Trump. So they can try and blame shift and say it's down to the socialists that are already in control in those states and cities that are allowing this chaos to happen. But then, of course, that's undermined by the fact that a lot of the instigators of this violence, including the murders this week in Wisconsin, were young white people killing more black people. So I'm not sure that the reality tallies with the rhetoric, and this is what it's going to come down to, because ultimately if people's lived experience of COVID, the economy, and whether they think their president is doing a good job, that is going to inform tens of millions of individual voter choices that will define the outcome of this election.
On that note, I did think that the president took a bit of a risk with CNN already going on about the lack of masks in the audience. Not so much the lack of, I understand why he didn't want to have his whole audience filled with people with masks, given he's trying to move on, and I get that, but they seem very close together. And if there is an outbreak from that, then he's really leading with his jaw there in a way he did not need to. If they just sat 2 meters apart from each other, like they did for Melania, if they were further apart then, I don't know why he insisted they be all crammed together like that. It's a risk, that's all.
It's more than a risk. Yeah. It would be a massive own goal. It would obviously be also a tragedy for particularly a lot of the older people there. I mean, there are some like people like Wilbur Ross. I mean, my goodness, he's in his 80s. There are a bunch of people that are in a high risk group that are taking a risk to show their support for President Trump. Suffice to say, most seasoned political operatives would not have allowed that to happen.
Yeah.
But Donald Trump has been ignoring seasoned political operatives, and it's gotten him an awfully long way in the last 4 years.
That's true.
All right. Now, as for the rest of this week's Republican convention speakers, there were a lot of Trumps, there were a lot of White House staffers, which was weird, including his own press secretary giving a speech. There were former soldiers, there were police officers, there were victims of crime. The tone went from the manic...
Ladies and gentlemen, leaders and fighters for freedom and liberty and the American dream, the best is yet to come.
I can't get enough of Kimberly Guilfoyle. Somebody famously once said of another speech, I'm sure it sounded better in the original German. So there was the very, very hyperactive Kimberly Guilfoyle. Then there was the rather more somber, even sleep-inducing Mike Pence.
We will re-elect our president and principled Republican leaders across the land. And with President Donald Trump in the White House for 4 more years, and with God's help, we will make America great again. Again.
I can't believe he ended with that. That's a joke. That's an actual Colbert
Stephen
joke.
Colbert joke.
Yes.
Yeah.
But
Well,
anyway.
it was, you know, it was a pretty wooden performance from Mike Pence.
He's meant to be steady.
He certainly is, and he's certainly very loyal for now. And he knows that in 2024, whatever happens this November, in 2024, he's going to be running for president himself. And he knows that 90% of Republicans still support Donald Trump. So he's still pinning his colours to the boss, and that's clearly his political play.
And his speech, by the way, ticked every box apart from entertaining that you're supposed to tick.
Apart from entertaining.
but
and that is all that matters in 2020 America.
I suppose.
Conservative politics.
But like, he did go straight through the record. He had lots of good attacks on Joe Biden. He did his job. It was very, very workmanlike, but it was... For people who watched it and who paid attention,
The ratings literally plummeted while Mike Pence was on. It was the lowest rated night of the entire convention.
Poor old Mike Pence.
We'll have a look at the ratings a little bit later as well. They tell a story. Okay, so as well as Kimberly and Mike, there was also a pretty good dose of, I think, unintentionally ironic stuff from Melania.
Total honesty is what we as citizens deserve from our president. Whether you like it or not, you always know what he's thinking. And that is because he's an authentic person who loves this country and its people.
Okay, so a man who has been found to have made more than 20,000 false and misleading statements by the Washington Post fact checkers. Honesty is important. I thought this was, hang on, she's trolling her husband. But no, she meant it without a hint of irony or sarcasm.
Well, I think the thing about Trump with honesty is that he's very honest about one thing, which is whether he likes you or not.
Sure.
To his detriment, he never hides whether he likes someone or
And
hates
he
them.
says the quiet bit out loud. He is, as we've discussed, he is both incredibly honest and often, frequently dishonest, all at the same time.
Yeah. But the fact is, if he likes you, he'll tell any lie to say something positive about you. And if he dislikes you, he'll tell any lie to say something negative about you.
Right.
It's weird the way that works. Anyway,
It is.
For me, the most noteworthy elements of this convention are, first of all, I've discussed this already, but I'll discuss it again, because it really was the big deal. The massive play for black votes.
Yeah.
There were, at least 10, maybe 15 speakers who were black and talking all about basically the same things over and over again. The black unemployment rate, criminal justice reform, opportunity zones, funding black colleges. These are all legitimate things to talk about, but just they really invested in that in terms of time.
And some were quite, obviously, Senator Tim Scott on night one gave the keynote at the end of night one. He's a very significant figure, being the first African-American male Republican senator, one of only 2 African-Americans currently in the United States Senate. So very interesting to hear his conservative worldview articulated by a black man. We don't hear that often. Only about 10% of African-American men identify as conservative.
Well, we heard it another 10 times in speeches like this.
Are we so offended by the president's campaign slogan, "Make America Great Again," that we're going to ignore that Joe Biden and Kamala Harris have collectively been responsible for locking up countless black men for nonviolent crimes?
Politicians are a dime a dozen. Leaders are priceless. The record funding Trump gave HBCUs is priceless too. So are the record number of jobs he created for the black community. and the investment he drove into our neighborhoods with tax incentives in opportunity zones. And so are the lives he restored by passing criminal justice reform, where 91% of the inmates released are black. He has done more for black Americans in 4 years than Joe Biden has done in 50.
That last guy there, yeah, he's a civil rights hero. He's their own John Lewis. No, he's not quite John Lewis, but he was there at the beginning as well. So they really invested in it, and they clearly believe that they can win at least black male votes at the very least. And I'll tell you how you know they're for real. It's one thing to just say these things over and over again. It's another thing when they go for the nasty attack.
I'm grateful for the spotlight that President Trump is putting on New York City public housing. I think it's wrong that the Democrats put illegal immigrants before black Americans. How is it that we have people waiting on the waiting list for New York City public housing for 10 years or more, but yet we have illegal immigrants living here? Something is wrong with that picture.
Okay, so when they're pulling out the illegal immigrants and all that kind of stuff, you're going, okay, they're really serious about this. They think they can win black votes. And so I found that really interesting. If I was the Democrats, I'd be nervous about that, the fact they were so invested in it.
Yeah. Some people were suggesting, though, that this isn't genuine outreach for the African-American vote. Yes, on the one hand, Trump feels as though there's a market opportunity there because he's only getting 5% of black women and he's only getting 10 to 12% of black men. So room for growth there in a pure business sense. Others were saying, no, look, this is really more about talking to the white suburban couples like the McCloskeys who are there in their front yard waving guns at black people to say to them, see, we're not really racist, we have black people too. And so it was more about providing a permission structure to them. What do you think of that argument?
I think normally I would ascribe to that myself. I think that's a very good argument, but just the sheer commitment of time. They only need to do that 2 or 3 times to do what you just said. They don't need to have 4 people a night, and often in really high profile slots as well, like right at the end there as well. I think they really are going for the black vote.
Yeah.
And they also, I thought, tied it quite cleverly, the issue of race, to violent crime, which is the other issue they're desperate to get out there to try and elevate as much as possible. In particular, I thought the most effective speaker, not just of tonight, but of the entire convention, this was this week's stutter boy from the Democrats convention, was the widow of David Dorn, who was the only speaker for the entire 4 days who didn't have a scent of partisanship about her. Even these ordinary people who are getting up all the time, lobster fishermen and stuff, always are getting the digs in on the Democrats. She wasn't doing that. She was just telling her story about her husband who died in the riots as a police officer, or an ex-police officer. And I don't think anyone who watched that is going to forget it.
As I slept, looters were ransacking the shop. They shot and killed David in cold blood, and then live streamed his execution and his last moments on earth. David's grandson was watching the video on Facebook in real time, not realizing he was watching his own grandfather dying on the sidewalk. I relive that horror in my mind every single day. My hope is that having you relive it with me now will help shake this country from this nightmare we are witnessing in our cities and bring about positive, peaceful change. Violence and destruction are not legitimate forms of protest. They do not safeguard black lives. They only destroy them.
That is effective.
A very compelling moment. I have to say, I do feel differently, and maybe it's an inconsistent argument on my part. I do feel differently when you see the victims of crime or the survivors of victims of crime, family members and so on, who are there advocating for the status quo out of fear of the alternative. So people saying, we must vote for Donald Trump because then we'll have more things that happened, arguably on Donald Trump's watch, more of those things will happen in the future. There's a kind of a logical leap there that I think is a bit unfortunate. I feel a bit differently, and this is where it may not be a non-contradictory argument on my part, but when you see people like last week at the Democrat convention saying, this thing happened to me, it should change because I want change into the future, that to me seems more logical. So making people in a position of grief fear the future. That's where I feel as though there's a bit of exploitation happening in these situations. And that may or may not be a fair observation, but I do view them differently.
Yeah, that's fair enough. What I was going to say is, in the case of Ann Dawn, she wasn't talking about fearing the future. The worst thing that could happen to her has already happened.
Yeah.
What she was talking about was we need to all get on the same page and agree that protests must not have looting and violence and rioting.
Yeah.
And she's saying
nobody disagrees with that. And to be used as a political prop in the same way as the White House itself was being used in a political prop. She may be apolitical. She was advocating for Donald Trump at Donald Trump's convention. So that, to me, I'm a little uncomfortable with.
Okay. Right. Well, the other thing which I thought was also very effective was we've kind of forgotten the Donald Trump from 2016, and they did. And he won for a reason. And they did try to bring back the Donald Trump from 2016 on a few occasions. First of all, with a whole bunch of swing state people, interestingly, who were pushing the America First thing, the America First trade thing. We had lobster fishermen, we had bronze manufacturers, we had all kinds of tradesmen and small business people talking about it. But in particular, a really surprise source of this message was Richard Grenell, who was a diplomat and an intelligence guy, and pretty much did everything for the Trump administration.
Became ambassador to Germany. He was acting DNI for a period of time.
Yeah.
Controversial MAGA guy, had been in Romney's orbit previously, but went all in for Trump in 2016.
Yeah, and he came up with, I thought, the best dissertation of Trump 2016 all over again.
So for decades, while Washington politicians built a global system, American wages stagnated. Our great cities and industries were hollowed out. Entire communities were devastated, and our manufacturing plants were shipped off to China. That's what happened when Washington stopped being the capital of the United States and started being the capital of the world.
And I think it might be too late, but I think Trump could do with a bit more of that, to be honest, because that was a winning message 4 years ago, and they have the raw material to work with it after the last 4 years, I feel.
The big contradiction that Trump has yet to overcome in his campaign is he is still campaigning as the angry outsider from the White House, as President of the United States. Talking about, and basically the argument is the swamp monsters are coming back. I've done everything. We got rich. Then this terrible thing happened that wasn't our fault. It was all China's fault. But I'm the one that's going to bring it back. Let's not go back to the political hacks like Joe Biden. That's an interesting argument, but tapping into people's discontent with today by saying, I'm the guy to fix it. I'm not sure that he's selling that particular message. And the polls at the moment suggest he is not selling that particular message, and that people don't have such short memories that they don't recall, and they're being reminded by multi-million-dollar ad spend, everything he said denying that the coronavirus was going to be a problem.
Yeah.
And he was trying to prop up the stock exchange just as he's talking it up now, as if it's some indicator of the economy. And meanwhile, another 1 million people signed on for unemployment last week.
There's simply no way that Donald Trump can escape that. They've just got to do their best to try and get around it, because there is no way he can escape what he said on the record in the biggest issue of not only this election, but for possibly a decade. It's very difficult to get away from that. That's his problem. But yeah, what I would say though is, you've made the point a few times, I think, correctly, that when you're the incumbent, it's hard to run against yourself. But I think I'll give them credit that they really, especially today, Ivanka and Trump, and Pence to a certain extent, they did spend a lot of time talking about what Donald Trump has done. They really did. I was actually surprised. Like, between Ivanka and Trump, there was probably a combined 40 minutes where they spoke about what Donald Trump has done in his 4 years. So they are making the case
Even
that
if
he's
it's
done
like
something
for the veterans that Obama actually did anyway.
Yeah, well,
but they claim credit for that as well. Look, for more, we're joined by Sam Nunberg. Sam is a former political advisor to Donald Trump. He worked with him on as well as the likes of Roger Stone for many years. Sam later fell out with Donald Trump and was actually sacked and then sued by Donald Trump at one point. In short, they have had their ups and downs. Sam Nunberg, welcome to the Fireside Chat.
Thank you for having me.
I think it's fair to say, Sam, you've had a love-hate relationship with Donald Trump over many years now. After seeing today's speech, what are you feeling, the love or the hate?
Well, I'm very proud of the president. This was a historic speech. Regardless of whether or not you support him or not, we're never going to see something like this again in our lifetimes. Hopefully we never have. another election during a pandemic. He spoke about a lot of the issues that I thought he had to touch on. This speech certainly hit home on the major themes and the major direction he wants to take this election and this choice that he wants to make between Biden and himself. Let's see if it works. It's a big gamble. My biggest worry about this is that we have a bunch of COVID cases coming out of the audience, frankly.
Out of the 4 days of this convention, Sam, who was the speaker that you liked the most, and what issue do you think was prosecuted the best?
It's a great question. Well, I think that the speech that came out the most, that I was so surprised to hear, so well done, was Rick Grinnell's speech. He spoke about he explained the president's foreign policy in a way that I think kept the president being seen as not only the incumbent, but as somebody who is really outside of both parties and bringing common sense to foreign policy. The other speech obviously was tonight's. I think that the president was able to really make the case in only the way that he can, that he is going to be the one who is going to be able to get this country out of this pandemic. This was a major contrast, and they're taking a major bet. The president has taken major gambles his whole life, and this is going to be a gamble. And what he's saying is, if you want more shutdowns, if you want mask mandates, I'm not your guy. Go vote for Joe Biden. If you want the country to get back open, you want the economy to get back open, and you want to run on these major right themes, major right choices against left choices, then this is what this election is about. And I think that he was able to frame it. Let's see how long it's able to last, because the Biden campaign is very well funded.
Sam, you talk about the president being a gambler and this being a gamble. If he's making this claim that Joe Biden would surrender the pandemic and we see a tragic uptick in coronavirus deaths between now and November 3rd, that's got to be game over for Donald Trump, surely.
The short answer is it probably is. The longer answer to that is, what is going to be the main issue people go to vote on? What is the main issue? If the exit polls show that COVID is one of the top 3 issues coming out that day, then the president is probably going to lose. If it is not, and it's the economy, it's healthcare, it's foreign policy, it's judges, meaning that it's a normal type of election that we've had in the past, then the president has a very good chance to get reelected. The numbers I have seen from the Trump campaign are, it is a closer race than it appears public, and I do trust them. When you look at likely voters, when you look at what they think that the composite of the electorate's going to be, how many percentage of Republicans are going to be out there compared to what you see in the public polling, I would say in general right now, this is a 5-point race. Joe Biden is ahead by 5 points nationally. But when I say ahead 5 points nationally, remember, gentlemen, that means that Donald Trump polls higher in other states as opposed to California, where he polls lower, in New York. So he's polling higher in Florida. He's close to 50 there. He's close to 50 in Ohio. And he's got a path to 270.
Sam, we've also seen a major theme of both the president's speech earlier today and throughout the week, including Vice President Pence yesterday, really hammering a law and order campaign in the wake of the Black Lives Matter protests and some of the associated lawlessness. This has got sort of, echoes of Richard Nixon 1968. Big difference being, of course, Richard Nixon was out of office in 1968. Donald Trump's trying to say what you're seeing now in America's cities is what you will get when Joe Biden is president, but it's happening while Trump is president. How do you square that circle?
Well, what the president is arguing here, and I agree with you in general, and I did think it was a losing strategy in the beginning. But the way they've recalibrated this message is the following. Look at the cities, look at the states where the rioting has been the worst. Look who does not want to accept the National Guard, and look who is talking about defunding the police. Those are all Democrat-run cities, Democrat-run states. And that is what he's saying. And he's saying if you want to send somebody who is owned by those people in Joe Biden, whether Joe Biden himself is a moderate, I don't believe he is anyway, then you take that risk, because you won't have me here protecting you, willing to do what I need to do if things get worse. And that's what he's willing to say. So he's making the point of saying that, yes, and maybe he doesn't say this as clearly as others have, but he addressed it in his speech, saying, yes, there can be protests, but there can't be riots, and we need our police. So I think that that's what they're doing. But you're also right, though. It is a problem because it is happening while he is president.
Sam, there seemed to be a genuine concerted attempt to win black votes during this convention. Do you think black votes are really in play?
I think, I think that we're going to see an uptick in black women, which is not a good sign for the president. I think black women have shown throughout his 4 years in office that if they come out and vote, it's very hard for the president overall. With that said, I think the president can get an uptick in black men and also mothers, perhaps. Mothers worried about safety, about crime, about drugs. So we'll see. They have invested in it. They're certainly not going to hit the number that they thought they were. I think the president thought he could get as much as a quarter. That's not happening. But they could get in the high teens or the low teens. If they get something like that, remember, that's the amount. They're taking that away from Joe Biden. But there's another problem, though, too. And the problem is for Joe Biden. Because Joe Biden, like Hillary Clinton, is making the same mistake. What's the mistake? They're trying to fight the last war. The same way these African-American voters came out in record numbers and voted for Barack Obama, they will never come out and vote like that again. The same way another Republican candidate will never get white rural voters the way Donald Trump does. So we're going to have to see what happens. And that's where it goes to turnout and it goes to voting.
Sam, Ivanka Trump, right at the end there, was the first speaker to make a serious attempt to humanize Donald Trump in this entire convention. No personal anecdotes. It was all about what he's done and what he might do in the future, or Joe Biden. The entire Democrat convention was about Joe Biden's character. Do you think it was a mistake to not make a more concerted effort to make Donald Trump more likable, given how important likability often is in elections?
You know, when I worked for the president, I'll tell you a very quick story. I came in with him about somebody who's a very smart guy who wrote an article. And the guy said, the president had met him. We had arranged meetings for the president early in the years when I was working for him, those 4 years in the run-up. And he said, if you saw the Donald Trump I knew, you would see a different Donald Trump than the Donald Trump that he shows himself in the public. And I showed this to him, and he said, yeah, but I don't want to do that. I don't want people to see that. So he has a way that he wants to look. And it goes to, when you look at his presidential picture compared to past presidents, he likes to look Churchillian, he'll say. So I'm not surprised. He wants to be a president who runs on leadership and strength and show that his kindness through his policies. It's not going to change, and he'll do that. He'll also have Melania try to humanize him as well, the first lady. But I don't think likability is going to help Joe Biden, because Joe Biden's numbers right now are falling, fave, unfave. So we're gonna have to see. The Biden campaign, I want to be very clear about this. They're banking on two things: COVID and hating Donald Trump. Now, the numbers look like that can work, but prevent defense has never worked this far out, this long for a presidential election.
Sam, I wonder, based on your years of working in close proximity to President Trump, when you see him requiring support coming down the stairs in the White House today, when you see him slurring his words, misspeaking a number of times through the speech, if Joe Biden had done any of that last week, we know what the demented Joe Biden stuff would be going on the internet at the moment. As candidly as you feel you can be, is Donald Trump diminished now in his mid-70s compared to what you knew, say, a decade ago?
Not really. I spoke with him a couple months ago for a long time. I saw him a month earlier than that. He seemed the same. Here's the bottom line. Look at Donald Trump and look at Joe Biden. Who looks healthier? And I don't think anybody can fairly say that Joe Biden looks healthier than Donald Trump. I mean, Joe Biden looks like a walking geriatric. And that's another issue going into this election, because Kamala Harris is from California. California is a very radical leftist state. That debate against Vice President Pence is going to be extremely important as well. And she's a quarter of a heartbeat from the presidency. So I understand people want to say, well, look at Trump. But if you're comparing it to Joe Biden, the bar is very, very low.
It's always great to talk to you. Sam Nunberg, thank you.
Thank you. I always love being on your show.
Well, time now for a check of the polls this week. And Joe Biden's lead in the Real Clear Politics national average has dipped by half a point to just over 7% this week. But a footnote on that, of the 4 national polls released this week that cover last week's Democratic convention and into this week's Republican convention, Biden was leading by 8 points in the Change Research poll, by 9 points in both the Harris X and YouGov polls. It's the Rasmussen poll, which has Biden leading by just 1 point, that brings that overall average down. Now, over at 538.com, where they weigh their poll averages based on the particular pollster's historical accuracy, Joe Biden is actually leading by almost 8.5 points. They only give Rasmussen a C+ for basically overestimating Republican support by around 1.5 points on average. What we can, though, say is that there has been no clear convention bounce this week for Joe Biden. We'll see next week, of course, if President Trump has reached beyond his base at all either to get any sort of a boost. Another interesting indicator, perhaps, TV ratings. The first 3 nights of the Republican convention this week drew an average audience of 16.5 million viewers across network and cable TV. That is down 23% on 2016. Last week, the Democrat convention attracted an average of 19.5 million viewers per night, so 3 million more Democrats watching the DNC, although that average also takes in Biden's big night on Thursday night, which has probably inflated those. Those numbers have dipped slightly since 2016 as well, down 21%. And of course, that could be down to a lower level of enthusiasm this year, but it could also be down to changes in technology and viewing habits. A lot of people watching this streaming online. We will have a definitive comparison when all of Trump's numbers come through. But now, Chaz, to the events in Kenosha, Wisconsin, a city of around 100,000 people. It's south of Milwaukee, just about halfway down to Chicago. On Sunday of this week, Jacob Blake, a 29-year-old black man, was shot 7 times in the back by police. And like a number of recent police-involved incidents, it was all caught on video. Now, Jacob Blake is in hospital. Reportedly, he's handcuffed to his hospital bed. Despite being paralysed, he may never walk again if he survives this. He had been pulled over after an apparent domestic incident. His former partner had reported that he was in her house without her permission. He had their children with him. A knife was later found in Blake's car. There is a dispute over whether he was holding the knife at any point. Just having a knife in your car is not illegal in Wisconsin.
Yes, and some have noted that there was an outstanding warrant issued for Blake for criminal trespass, 3rd-degree sexual assault and disorderly conduct with domestic violence as a modifier, and so that would add an element to the police encounter. Maybe so, but that does not explain exactly why the actual shooting occurred. When it did, there are many questions to be answered about that yet. But regardless, we then saw some of the now familiar fires and looting and bickering over its coverage. Conservatives had some fun with this chyron from CNN. Fiery but mostly peaceful protests, he says, in front of a fire escape. But Jacob Blake's mum cut through it all with this plea here.
Please don't burn up property and cause havoc and tear your own homes down in my son's name. You shouldn't do it. People shouldn't do it anyway. But to use my child or any other mother or father's child, our tragedy, to react in that manner is just not acceptable. And it's not helping Jacob. It's not helping Jacob or any other of the men or women who has suffered in these areas.
But then things got worse. People started putting calls like this out, asking people to take up arms and defend our city. One of the people who responded to those kinds of calls was 17-year-old Coleittenhouse. Rittenhouse is a big Trump fan. He's been in the front row of a Trump rally. His social media has lots of Blue Lives Matter support. But so far, there's been no sign of white supremacy or extremism. In fact, he told reporters what he was doing there only hours before the shooting.
People are getting injured, and our job is to protect this business, and part of my job is to also help people. If there's somebody hurt, I'm running into harm's way. That's why I have my rifle, because I need to protect myself, obviously. But I also have my med kit.
Unfortunately, whether you have good or bad intentions, if you lack training, the results can be the same. Enter this guy in the red shirt, who definitely was not a fan of the vigilantes.
Where he at? Shoot me. Shoot me, man. Bust on me, for real.
Later in the night, that guy in the red shirt appeared to chase Rittenhouse across a car park, and you can see for yourself what happened then.
Oh, he got a gun, baby. Oh, they shoot him. Oh, he shot him.
The guy in the red shirt was shot in the head and died soon after. Will that be seen as self-defense? I don't know. Either way, Rittenhouse ran off for whatever reason and was soon being chased by other protesters, and then he tripped over and this happened. One more person shot dead, another shot in the arm. Once again, maybe it's self-defense, maybe it's not. Tucker Carlson seems to have made up his mind who's at fault here, though.
We do know why it all happened, though. Kenosha has devolved into anarchy because the authorities in charge of the city abandoned it. People in charge from the governor of Wisconsin on down refused to enforce the law. They stood back and they watched Kenosha burn. So are we really surprised that looting and arson accelerated to murder? How shocked are we that 17-year-olds with rifles decided they had to maintain order when no one else would?
Now, that is not true. There were 250 National Guardsmen out that night, so were the police. In fact, the police appeared to have earlier thrown the future shooter and his pals bottles of water and told them how much they appreciated them.
You need water? Seriously. Guys, far right, you need water. We need water. We'll throw you one. Thank you. All right, come on, guys, let's get out of here. We appreciate you guys, we really do.
An interesting approach to vigilantes there, but my biggest concern was acting Homeland Security Chief Chad Wolf, who basically agreed with Carlson. Individuals have a right to protect themselves and their businesses and what they've worked for all their life to build. Fault lies with the local leaders and those local law enforcement of not doing their job. Now, John, it's one thing for a rabble-rouser like Carlson to say that. People obviously have the right to protect their property, but the Homeland Security Secretary essentially giving the green light to vigilantes directly after 2 people were shot dead, that's pretty wild.
Yeah, and Tucker Carlson isn't just another shock jock. He is a nightly presence on Fox News with a hotline to President Donald Trump, arguably at least as influential with the president as Sean Hannity. So his take on this is also empowering President Trump to think in these terms. That a child has a weapon in a protest is, it is just a tragic situation. Ridiculous that American law actually encourages a child with a gun to be getting themselves involved and then being fed all of this rubbish about how they should be defending their streets and their cities and everything else. He is, to an extent, a victim. He is a stupid kid who's now going to pay a very high price. We don't know how radicalised he has become, whether we should actually be seeing him more like a school shooter, another deranged young man with a gun fetish, just looking for a reason to shoot perceived enemies. So we'll see how this plays out, but it's a terribly unfortunate situation. But we can't allow the president and his supporters to distance themselves from this entirely. Not only was he a Trump supporter, presumably he was watching the Republican convention on night 2 when they had elevated the McCloskeys heroes for waving their guns at Black Lives Matter protesters in their house in a gated community in St. Louis, Missouri. They have sown the seeds. This is the whirlwind they're reaping. I just hope it ends with this. My fear is, as far as President Trump's re-election is concerned, the only way to stop people talking about his terrible handling of the coronavirus is to think that the streets are on fire. Yeah. And now we're seeing it. Yeah, look, I have to agree with you about the mindset of the McCloskeys being involved here, even if, I don't know if he himself was into the McCloskeys, but when you look at the interviews that Rittenhouse conducted on the night, and there were quite a few, and you look at some of the things that he's put online, it seems almost certain that he saw himself as a hero. Now, that mindset had to have come from somewhere, and I think that's a concern. And that grandiosity and attention-seeking behaviour as well is not inconsistent with other shooters as well. We'll find out more, I'm sure. Yeah. But that is all the time we have for another Fireside Chat. If you missed Planet America this week, you'll find it on ABC iView, Facebook and YouTube now. We're going to see you next week on ABC TV at 9:30 and back here next week. Sorry, no podcast tonight, technical issues. See you next week on that. Good night. Bye-bye.